Today I will tell a bit about Saint Petersburg bombing and the court case which resulted. The bombing happened in April 2017, 3 years ago, and in the last December there was finally a court session in Saint Petersburg where a number of people were sentenced, given long prison sentences for this attack, but human rights activists consider this a dubious case. And originally I wrote a newspaper column for Kansanuutiset paper on March, but a comrade translated this text in English, so I can also make video and podcast version of this. And also there are people in Russia, in St. Petersburg, and also human rights activists who consider this court, which took place in December, as dubious, and list these people as political prisoners, or at least victims of miscarriage of justice. So basically the attack, according to the sentence, or according to the investigation, was carried by Barzhan Jalilov in St. Petersburg, who died in this bombing in April 2017, and they accused of a jihadist group of mainly Uzbek fighters, which is based in Syria, for having committed this attack as kind of attempt to take a Syrian war to Russia. But this group never claimed this attack, and it's quite possible. I think it's highly likely that indeed the person, this Barzhan Jalilov, was indeed the person who committed the attack, but also it's not clear if it was really, maybe it was his personal initiative. It's not clear if this was connected to any group or if he was much cooperating with anyone. One of the people, Abdul Razimov, who got the highest sentence in the court, he got a life sentence, is likely, or at least possible, to be somehow involved in this plot, because he was transferring money. But his brother Akram was only once passing some money from Turkey, and it's not much evidence that this brother Akram had much idea what this money was being used for, and that it was being used for preparation of this attack. And many more people were sentenced in much more weaker grounds, like Shohista Karimova. She's a 48 years old migrant worker woman, and she got a 20 years prison sentence just for having activated a SIM card as requested by Abror. And also Sodi Kortikov, in the same occasion, they were just sitting in some cafe, and he make a test call to this Karimova's phone, just because these people asked, like, if someone asked you to make a test call to your phone, I mean, why wouldn't, if you put a new SIM card, I mean, how would you just refuse from this? Most likely they didn't have much of any idea who are these people and where how this SIM card would be used. And there is 7 migrant workers who are even less connected to think they were just sharing common flat in Tovarishevsky Prospect in St. Petersburg. This flat was raided. It was under suspicion because of some calls. And only one of these people actually knew the attacker, the Jalilov. So probably they just happened to be in the wrong place in the wrong time. And according to the investigation in this flat, and also in the flats of the accused I previously mentioned, there has been ammunitions or grenades or some guns, but this kind of evidence is pretty easy and often framed up in Russia. So this is not much of evidence. There should be some case of the prosecution to have credibility, there should be some more proof that these people really know what they were doing and what was their role and so on. Basically, this is just some random hand grenades or ammunitions found out in this place. And also, 3 of the accused were tortured in the secret FSB prison in the Moscow region for quite a long time to confess being part of this plot, but they eventually in the court they were telling about the torture and also withdrawing the evidence. But this didn't play much role. All of these attackers got very long prison sentences. Akram got 28 years in prison, and Shokista Karimova, she got 20 years in prison and so on. Like most of these people got around 20 years in prison for with quite dubious ground. And but also there hasn't been much of any big public outrage, not to talk about even any support actions in Russia. All of these people who got sentenced, they are somehow marginalized migrants. Many of them are from the Uzbek minority of Kyrgyzstan, which is in itself a discriminated group to the extent that in 2010 there was a massacre in the city of Osh in Kyrgyzstan against the Uzbek minority, and between 400 and 2,000 Uzbeks were killed. And some of these accusers that they are originally from the same city of Osh. So basically in this there is a kind of complicated ethnical power hierarchies in Russia with multiple levels and aspects, but these people are basically one of the most discriminated people because in the former Soviet Union, because they are discriminated in their home country, in Kyrgyzstan, and also even more they are discriminated in Russia as migrant workers. And among all the migrant workers, they are one of the most marginalized groups. So obviously it's quite easy to pick up these people and to frame them up, especially if there was this terrorist attack. It's very unlikely that the bomb itself was any kind of plot or conspiracy or something. And probably, at least the perpetrator was involved in it, and so it's quite easy to create a massive conspiracy and outrage and to advance in career in the secret services just by putting a number of random people to prison. But because these are heavily discriminated and marginalized people, there is not much of public outcry, which you can compare to, like, for example, Ivan Golunov case, who was arrested in last June. It's a known journalist, investigative journalist, who was investigating corruption issues, and because of this, police who was connected to some business people who had interest to put Golunov in prison, tried to frame him up. But there was big public outcry and demonstrations, and the professional, especially amongst the professional journalists community. And after just a few days, Golunov was released. Has also been big support campaigns for people who were arrested after protests against electionary fraud, protests for elections last summer in Moscow. And some of these people got released, some of them got their prison sentence reduced, some are eventually ended up to prison for many years, so this was not as successful as the Golunov case, but there was quite a big public interest, even though these were also people who were partially from diverse backgrounds, but still they were kind of accepted democratic protesters, but just random migrant workers who are framed up for some terrorist charges there is not such a big campaign against them and not a big public outcry of interests. So this is why I think it's easy to talk about this case, or I mean important to talk about the case of the people accused of the metro bombing in Saint Petersburg, because it's very easy to completely destroy life of these people. And we should not let the authorities to do this kind of thing, just to pick up the most vulnerable people and put them to 2 decades in prison, or even to a life sentence. Another thing why this is important aspect is that it's just another example how easy it is to manipulate anti-terrorist laws. And there is Russia, obviously, in Europe has had probably the biggest problem with this kind of struggle with far-right nationalist or political Islamist jihadist groups who have been making attacks, and this is a real existing problem. But often the counter-reaction has also been destructive and targeted many people who are hardly connected to these issues. So if you want to see which kind of abuses and problems there can be with anti-terrorist legislation, Russia is offering plenty of examples on how this problem should not be solved.